Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring, and welcome to a Stick to the Script review. The name for these reviews originally derived from the fact that I worked from scripts when I made them, but now I script almost everything on the channel in an attempt to sound a little more professional, and the nature of the Stick to the Script series has changed. Now these videos are simply scripted reviews that focus more on the experience of playing a game rather than going into the rules in great detail. As such, the title is somewhat ironic, as I am far more likely to go off on a wild tangent in these reviews than I would in others. I frequently joke that by watching one of my Stick to the Script reviews, you have as much chance of learning about my favourite type of biscuits as you have of learning about board games. But there are no biscuits today. Nothing so quaint. Because today, I am talking about Dark Souls the board game from Steamforged Games. I was late to the Souls series of video games. I mean really late. I'm not much of a video gamer. I used to be, once upon a time, but not now. And while I had always wanted to try Dark Souls, I'd seen too many get good memes. I knew how the enemies respawned every time you died, or when you noped out of a zone to take stock and level up. I knew about the heavily skill-based combat and terrifying boss monsters. And I was pretty sure I was going to have a horrible time, get stuck on the first level, and regret my purchase. I guess it wasn't so much a fear of getting good, it was more a fear of getting my money's worth. But then came the dark days of the UK lockdown, and with them came more time stuck in the house and a deep discount on Dark Souls 3 on the PlayStation Store. Seemed like the perfect time to give the game a whirl. It could hardly be as dark, scary or frustrating as the real world was anyway. And I think my introduction to Dark Souls 3 was similar to many other people's. I killed a couple of hollows, thought things weren't so tough, got immediately mangled by a big spinning ball of spiky crystal death, respawned, chose to go in the other direction, and got immediately mangled by the tutorial boss. Dark Souls doesn't do tutorials in the same way normal games do tutorials. Dark Souls just teaches you how to die well. And die I did, getting ambushed by hollows, smashed by knights, and panic rolling off rooftops. But I wasn't just dying. I was learning, improving, and I was having fun. I found my groove about the time I killed Vort on my first attempt, and by then there was no turning back. There were more mistakes, so many more, and you better believe that I didn't have a clue what embers were for the first half of the game. I dressed in the Fallen Knight set, never once pulled off a successful parry, and I had absolutely no clue whatsoever what was actually going on. Yet I fell in love with the game. I think it's a masterpiece. Dark Souls 3 is wonderful in almost every aspect. It has an incredibly rich, deep lore that you can immerse yourself in and debate endlessly, but you can choose to completely ignore it if you wish, and still thoroughly enjoy the game for its incredible look, level designs, vast selection of weapons and items, and skill-based gameplay. And the world you get to explore is as beautiful as it is bleak. You may not understand the story of that world, but you will surely understand the essence of it. You will understand that sense of decay and destruction, the feeling of a world gasping out its last breath beneath the weight of a dreadful curse. It's a world that resonates on an emotional level first, in the same way you don't need to know someone's story to understand the sadness in their eyes. For all its talk of gods, monsters and the undead, this is a human story, an exploration of humanity itself, a study on what it is to be human, to struggle underneath an incomprehensible weight without necessarily understanding the reason, and to live well. It's certainly a story about life, death and rebirth, the cyclical nature of existence. Repetition is embedded in everything, from the overarching story of a dying world trapped in a cycle of misery, constantly rekindled by flames in the darkness, to the core gameplay mechanism of enemies resetting each time you re-enter a location. It's baked into the new Game Plus system, where even after completing the game you are damned to endlessly repeat your journey, meeting the same doomed characters and facing stronger and stronger enemies in a quest without end. Even the levels have a beautiful cyclical design, often linking back up to where you started through the clever implementation of shortcuts, elevators and gates that only open from one side. It is, of course, no surprise the dark sign that brands the cursed undead is a fiery circle. And so I guess it's also no surprise that I approached the board game with the same kind of trepidation as I did the video game. History was repeating itself. Once again, I was very late to the party. I hadn't backed the Kickstarter, and by the time the game came to retail I had heard all the horror stories. It was, by many accounts, too long, too boring, too repetitive, too limited, and too hard. It was expensive too. I watched a lot of playthroughs, and everyone I watched made me think I would like the game. I understood the complaints people had made, I could even see why those complaints existed, but they didn't look like something that would bother me. I'd never been someone to worry about how long a game takes to play. I am happy to play one game all evening if I am fully engrossed in it. My intention is never to speedrun a board game. Furthermore, to me the core gameplay elements looked incredibly interesting. The combat with its dynamic movement, stamina system and clever balance of skill and luck felt like not only one of the most engaging representations of swirling melee combat I had ever seen on the tabletop, but also an excellent adaptation of the core mechanisms of the video game. And then there was the boss fights, protracted, engaging, exciting conflicts far deeper than most boss battles in your average board game. I got a strong sense this would be something I really enjoyed, particularly as a solo experience, which is how I play a lot of my games a lot of the time. And yet those reviews, those commonly repeated complaints, that cycle of the same issues being raised over and over again, rekindled in every online forum. Surely I was kidding myself. But eventually, I finally took the plunge and I purchased the core set. And I absolutely love this game. This, for me, is a top 10 game. Now, I could have structured the rest of this review by taking all of the common complaints about the Dark Souls board game, going through them one by one and explaining why they aren't issues for me. But I don't want to come across as dismissing or diminishing those opinions from other gamers. I don't want to position myself as some kind of opposition party to the ruling government. I understand all the complaints, and I would say that almost every one of them has some merit and could be a deal breaker for someone. So instead, I'm just going to talk about the game and why it works for me. And I suppose I should stress, I bought the original Dark Souls core set and I play almost exclusively by the original rules. I did download and try out the latest rules from the new revised core sets, but for the most part I didn't really think there was an issue with the game as it was, so apart from a few minor changes to how I handle visits to the bonfire and stamina, I play the game as it was originally presented, and I still consider the original core set to be the best way for new players to get into the game. For me, that core game, that first out of the box experience, is a pure distillation of the Dark Souls experience. It's a cooperative game for up to 4 players, and it cares very little about explaining the nature of this world. There is no extensive background fluff in the rules, and no real explanation of why you are doing anything you are doing. In the video game, you learn as much or as little of the world as you choose. Your own agency defines the narrative, pushing you towards a goal you may barely comprehend. I guess real life is no different. We are dragged kicking and screaming into the world, little sparks that must grow and flourish with no concept of any grand design or any goal to accomplish. We grow and we learn and we find our own way and we forge our own purpose. We are all players in a grand script that we never get to read. Some of us occasionally get to step into the limelight, others become footnotes, and some burn out in the dark. And the purpose isn't to know the end, it's to live through the journey regardless of how much of the story we understand. So the board game simply presents that journey, with little context beyond a few paragraphs of introductory flavor text. People who have never played the video games may be confounded by this, which is understandable, but Dark Souls confounds many fans anyway. Confusion, a sense of unease, and uncertainty on which side of the line you fight and where your allegiance should lie, and densely packed lore that only seems to become more obtuse with each new pearl of wisdom you discover, is all part of what makes this setting at once so cold and dead, yet so full of mystery and excitement. The game throws you into the heart of darkness and asks only one thing of you: to live. You select a character with a predetermined set of equipment, and up to 3 friends can come along with you. My personal preference when playing solo is to control 2 characters at once. And then you enter the first board, an arena where death awaits. You draw a card that determines the contents of that room, including enemies and where they are positioned, and then you place your heroes adjacent to the entrance. Rather than being divided into squares, these arenas contain nodes, spots in the room where up to 3 characters can stand at any one time. These nodes are functionally similar to squares or hexes in any other game, but they somehow make the play space feel more open, and as a result, the combats have a real sense of free-flowing fluidity, with the characters gracefully wheeling around each other free of the confines of a conventional combat grid. It's a really good choice and helps to make the board game feel more like the video game. Naturally, combat is the central element of the game. There is, frankly, very little else. There is no real sense of exploration, There are no NPCs to engage with. There are no side quests. No quests. There is bloody endless combat, and occasionally a barrel to smash or a trap to stand on. But that combat, my goodness, that combat is beautiful and cruel and visceral and engaging and significantly based on skill despite using dice. No other combat system more adequately depicts the swirling melee, the dynamic, endlessly twirling positioning and repositioning of adversaries locked in a duel to the death. Combat always begins with the hero selecting the aggro character, the plum who has bumbled into danger first, and then the enemies activate, responding to the intrusion with great vengeance and furious anger. They will activate in a set order based on their threat value, with the most dangerous foes activating first, and they will each follow their own simple AI. At first glance, the monster cards seem quite confusing, but once you know what all the symbols mean, it becomes second nature. For example, the commonly encountered hollow soldiers will move one space towards the closest hero, as indicated by the symbol on the lower left of the card, and then they will hit the closest hero for 4 damage, as indicated by the symbol in the lower right of the card. When dealing with the closest hero, if there is a choice, the monsters will go for the hero with the aggro token. Failing that, the hero with the highest taunt value is the lucky winner. Conversely, the hollow crossbowman will take one step farther away from the current aggro hero and then shoot the current aggro hero for 3 damage. That level of simplicity with how the monsters move and react to the heroes may seem damning. How can it possibly be engaging? But that simplicity is an essential component of the design for 2 reasons. 1, because you are going to be moving the monsters a lot and you need a system that will let you do that quickly and effectively. And 2, the simplicity of the enemy's core programming allows you to internalize and predict their actions. And regardless of the simplicity, there is a real joy in seeing how all the monsters on the board react as one. They will continually shift position, putting the players under pressure and creating a swirling maelstrom that constantly poses new questions. When you are facing enemies that can push heroes as they move or hit multiple targets, bouncing them around the room, and you factor in that heroes can use a dodge ability to step out of danger, the battlefield is in a constant state of flux. You need to think several moves ahead. You need to understand how every move you make will impact the AI system. Nothing remains still, so you must constantly adapt to the ever-changing threats. If an enemy strikes a hero, that hero has choices. They can spend 1 stamina and optionally move 1 space to attempt a dodge. Each monster or boss attack has a dodge value, and you simply add up the number of dodge dice granted by your current equipment loadout and then roll that many green dodge dice, each of which has a 50% chance of a success. Roll successes equal to the attacker's dodge value and you negate all the damage. Fail and you take 100% of the incoming damage plus any status effects from the attack, which will probably severely cripple you. The second choice is to tank the attack. In this case, you add up all the defense dice from your equipment and roll them. For each success, you negate 1 point of incoming damage. Even if no damage gets through your armor, you will still take any status effects from the attack because you took the hit on the chin. For the revised rules, dodging was significantly changed, as even if you failed to dodge, you could still then tank the attack on your armor and shield. And while that does make sense, I do think it takes away slightly from one of the most agonizing decision points in combat. After facing an attack, for each damage point you take, you place 1 damage cube on the right hand side of your endurance bar. In the original rules, if you place a cube that fills up your bar, you are defeated. In the revised rules, you are only defeated if you have to place a cube and have no space left to place it. And in this case, I do prefer the revised ruling. It's a little more forgiving, but it lets you push just a little harder as you play and keeps the game going at a slightly faster pace. After the monsters are done, the first player activates. They regain 2 stamina if they have used any previously, then they can move an attack or attack then move. Moving 1 node is free, and for each additional node you pay 1 stamina, which means placing a black cube on the leftmost slot of your endurance bar. The cost to attack depends on your weapon. A weak light weapon may only cost 2 stamina to attack with. A huge heavy double-handed weapon could cost 4 or 5. And of course, the interesting thing is that the stamina and health are tracked on the same endurance bar on your character board. If you've taken too much damage, you won't be able to spend a lot of stamina when you activate on your turn. If you use too much stamina, pushing your character to the limit, 1 good punch could take you out of action. It's a fascinating balancing act, and a good part of the game is learning when to push and put yourself in danger, and when to take a breather and try to recover some health or stamina before getting back into the action. It's a lovely recreation of combat from the video games. You can't just push and push and push making big attacks. If you do, you're going to blow out and then you will be at the mercy of the enemies. And I do truly believe the designers did a great job of capturing the essence of Dark Souls combat, and that's despite the fact that the combat makes use of custom dice. Each weapon grants a combination of black, blue and orange attack dice, which have different numbers of success on them. You roll the right number of dice, add up the successes, and then reduce the total by the enemy's block value in the case of physical attacks, or resist value in the case of magical attacks. The remainder is the amount of damage inflicted. I think this will be a breaking point for some people. Rolling dice means an element of luck in what you do, which isn't what the combat in the video games is about. In Dark Souls you don't get lucky, you get good. But for me, the dice are an essential component in making the board game work. Yes, it's an element of luck, but it's also an effective way to add the variability that in the video game would come from mistiming your dodge, being slightly out of position, misreading the enemy's tell, getting distracted, failing to spot an ambush, or anything else that can go wrong. It also makes it impossible to predict with 100% accuracy the outcome of any battle. Because enemies always react in the same way using their simple AI systems identically turn after turn, through skill and experience it does become possible to predict how a battle will unfold. You can see it in your mind's eye. You can plan with a great deal of certainty how you should work through the battle to emerge unscathed. But you can't plan for the bad dice. Sometimes you just have to accept a bad dice roll and then panic roll for a bit until you regain control of the situation. And it's interesting to note that only heroes roll dice. Enemies apply consistent damage. It is your defense or dodge roll that reduces that damage, and they will always soak the same amount of damage when you hit them. It's the success of your attack roll that determines if they fall. The enemies are computers. They do not make mistakes, they do not falter. They vigorously and unquestioningly follow their set programming, and they will do so methodically and without error. It's up to you to find a way to deal with it. It's not as if you don't have the tools at your disposal. In addition to what weapons and armor you have, each hero has access to 3 one-use powers. They each have an Estus flask, which they can drink at any time to remove all the stamina and damage tokens from their endurance bar. You can do this right at the end of your activation, giving you the ability to push yourself to the wire, use every single space of your endurance bar, and then clear down so you should be safe to face any retaliations. Each hero also has a luck token, which allows them to re-roll any 1 dice when attacking, defending or dodging. Finally, each hero gets 1 heroic action, a special ability unique to that character, such as rolling more dice in attack, healing damage or recovering stamina. These add a little more character and flavour to the heroes and can be really useful in a pinch. But regardless of the resources available to you, it never seems enough, because after a hero activates, any remaining enemies activate again. Then the next hero activates, followed by any remaining enemies, and so on. The heroes are constantly under pressure, forever facing a barrage of attacks. It's intense and deeply satisfying in a way few other combat systems I've played compare with. There is a simple elegance to the flow of the gameplay, and yet every turn is packed with choices to make. How much stamina to spend, where to position yourself, which weapons to use, whether to spend a precious luck token or Estus, or activate your heroic ability. Picking a target, thinking ahead to understand how the surviving enemies will react to what you've done. It's a captivating dance, a mesmerising display of ingenuity combining skill, memory, foresight, luck mitigation, pushing your luck, positional play and clever use of all your resources. And often, especially early on, you will lose. Defeat occurs if any one of the characters present is knocked out. In that case, you drop any souls you were carrying in that room, and if you are defeated again before you can reclaim those souls, they are lost forever. Even worse, after a defeat, you must rest at the bonfire to reignite your drive to succeed. You regain any Estus flasks, luck tokens and heroic actions, and clear down your endurance bar so you're ready to dive back in. But if you use up all your sparks, it's game over for good. But as long as you have sparks remaining, you go again. Any enemies you defeated respawn and the room is reset, as if you had never been there before. Only, you have been there before, and now you know what lurks in the dark. Vital knowledge feeds into that second attempt, and maybe the third. You develop your skills, and you get good. And then you succeed. When that happens, you clear any stamina and damage tokens from your endurance bar, so you are fighting trim for the next encounter. You regain any dropped souls, and you gain extra souls based on the enemies you are fighting. These can be used immediately to buy upgraded equipment, to level up your character so they can use upgraded equipment, or to restore used luck tokens. Alternatively, you can save them for a later purchase, which comes with the risk of losing them. Then you have a choice. You can press on to the next room and the new challenges it contains, or you can rest at the bonfire. Of course, returning to the bonfire will cost you a spark, and it will reset any rooms you had previously cleared, but you will regain used luck tokens, Estus flasks, and heroic abilities, and having to clear rooms again will grant you a lot more souls to go shopping with. In other words, you have the choice. Push on, or grind for experience. The level of grind is limited by the number of sparks you have, but ultimately, how hard you push, how far you go before you decide to stop for breath, is up to you. This is a game about skirmishes that stack up to wear you down, eventually forcing you to retreat and face those same skirmishes again, armed not only with better equipment, but with the knowledge of what awaits you. There is pattern recognition. When you enter a room, the monsters will always spawn in the same locations, as will any obstacles, and the monsters will move in the same patterns, following the same rudimentary AI systems. If you move to your left and a monster hits you, there's a very good chance that monster is going to hit you every time you move to the left, and so you learn. Sometimes improved weapons will help you. I am a Dark Souls player who has always put his faith in a big shield rather than a parry, but it's predominantly through experience and memory that victory emerges. Dark Souls is never more sympathetic to the human condition than in its approach to challenge. Everybody faces challenges. Real life is rarely easy, and for many, every day is a struggle. It's a battle that we drag ourselves through. There is so much that wants to break us down and slow our progress, and sometimes we have to butt our head against a problem time and time again. But the true value in existence comes from the victories we earn along the way as we face those problems and overcome them. The experience, the knowledge, the strength. We are empowered not by what we achieve, but what we learned to achieve it. This is every bit as true in the board game, and it's not just a matter of learning what each enemy can do, how it moves and how hard it hits. It's learning your own limitations, finding the balance of when to push your luck and when to back up. In the first boss fight I ever played, I overextended, thinking I had the fight in the bag and I could finish the enemy with one powerful blow, but I failed in the attack and was decimated in response. But the game didn't do that to me, I did that to myself, and I learned. And trust me, you will need to learn well, because the boss fights in this game are epic, exciting, and incredibly challenging. You get an excellent selection of terrifying foes in the original core box, all with their own strengths and weaknesses. Unlike regular enemies, these foes are run by their own AI decks. Each time the boss activates, you flip the top card from the deck and perform the actions. This may involve devastating swinging attacks that hit and push multiple targets, magical barrages that strike heroes cowering at the back, gigantic leaps, or complex spinning movements combined with elegant devastating strikes. Once the AI deck is exhausted, you flip the deck and play it again without shuffling the cards. So gradually players with good memories, in other words not me, will learn the sequence of attacks and be able to prepare in advance. This adds a wonderful structure to the fight, as the heroes initially don't know what they are going to face and carefully prod at the boss, keeping their distance, playing it cautiously, and learning what they are up against. Then, having played through the deck once, the heroes become more confident, pushing harder, planning ahead for what the boss will do next. And then, of course, the game kicks you in the ass. At a certain point, the bosses will heat up. After taking a specific amount of damage, they enter their second phase. You add extra heat up cards to the deck and shuffle it. Now, not only do the heroes have to learn the sequence again, they also have to prepare for an unknown extra special powerful heat up attack. So the cycle begins again. The exploration, the poking, the prodding, the cautious unpeeling of the enemy's abilities. Then, finally, the big push that brings low the boss and grants the heroes more souls and some amazing upgraded weapons unique to that boss encounter. And that is the Dark Souls board game. You fight, you learn, you beat a boss, you win. You can create campaigns stringing together several bosses if you want to, and the new revised core sets have their own campaign systems, but I tend to play standalone encounters as the game does take a long time to get through. Really, this isn't a game you can breeze through in a couple of hours. If you want to get all the way to a boss, you are going to be giving up a whole evening, maybe even longer. And I'm fine with that. I have filler games, I have games that take an hour or two, and then I have Dark Souls, a game that demands your time but rewards you for every minute you spend with it. And some people will hate it. They will hate it because the core game loop is all about repetition. They will hate it because the focus is so heavily on the combat with little else to sink your teeth into if that combat isn't doing it for you. They will hate it because of the dice rolling. Some people will hate it because the enemies activate so frequently to the point you often feel you're controlling the bad guys more than your hero. Some people will hate it because the enemies always behave the same way, and through practice you can predict to a certain degree of accuracy what they will do, with only bad dice flummoxing you. Some people will hate the grind necessary if you want to unlock the most powerful equipment. Some people will hate the lack of context for what you are doing. And I wouldn't say anybody is wrong for hating it, but I love this game. The big question is, do I love the board game as much as I do because I love the Dark Souls 3 video game? I would say no, with a dash of yes. Remember, I came late to the party where Souls games are concerned, and while I've played Dark Souls 3 several times, I've never played any of the other Dark Souls titles, although I did enjoy Bloodborne immensely. I do consider Dark Souls 3 my favourite video game, except for maybe Shining Force 2 or Landstalker, but I don't think that would be enough to make me enjoy a board game that I would otherwise think was poor. The game does very much stand on its own. It's fun in isolation of its IP. However, my connection with the video game series does mean I get the enjoyment of seeing recognisable characters, weapons and items in the board game. There is a certain additional enjoyment to derive from seeing challenging bosses translated and reimagined in a totally different format. It's actually very impressive how the designers captured the movesets of the bosses and found a way to present them on the tabletop. But ultimately, you don't need to know anything about Dark Souls to understand the board game. There's so very little to understand. You are in a world of hurt and you have to fight to survive. If you get knocked down, you get up and try again. If you fail, you reconsider your strategy and you keep on going. You will revel in every success, no matter how minor, and learn from every setback, no matter how much defeat stings. Winning isn't quick, and it's never easy. It takes time and effort. You can stall for a bit, grind for experience, put off facing the final challenge, but you're just delaying the inevitable, ignoring the fact that sooner or later you will have to step up or step down. And if you win, when you win, because you will win, you know it's because you didn't let the game beat you. It is the true essence of the Dark Souls experience. It is the true essence of what it is to be human.